Well, I'm Renate Bullock, and I live here in Boyce Town, right beside the beautiful Miramichi. And I always figure, as my husband did, who's since passed away, I always figured we were living in heaven NB. Because to look out and see the fish jump and roll the way they used to, and also to see some of these fantastic sunsets, where would you go to get all of that in one package? You know, it's something that I've enjoyed for, well, we bought it in 1973, and we've lived here permanently since 1985. Actually, it started that we came salmon fishing when Fred and I got married in 1966. We came up here for our honeymoon and spent it at Rocky Bend. And Harley, of course, did the fishing. I just observed him casting. It was just magical to see how he could, fish and read the water and all that. And I was quite taken by it. I really was, because all I knew was hook and worm, for chubs or whatever. When you see a fish move, and having had the tug, I always say the tug was the drug that kept you coming back and wanting to have that tug again. And I just enjoyed it, I really did. And then if you fish dry fly, to see a fish come up and grab it and take it down, or even just to roll at it, for me that was exciting. I had had the pleasure of the tug so many times that I then wanted to pass that on to somebody else that was fishing and hope the same for them. When you own a place on the river, it's amazing the friends you make of people who love to fish, and especially if you have salmon water. So we had relatives coming from Ontario, and not being fisher people, but wanting to fish, they figured, oh well, if we get out there at 11 o'clock or so, that'll be great. So what happened was, my husband Fred's brother-in-law, he would come and he'd say, well, he says, I'm going to sleep in this morning. In the meantime, Fred would have a guide hired because they were non-residents and needed a guide. And he'd be paying a guide all morning for nobody fishing. So I remember saying to Fred, Fred, I says, I've got enough experience, I think, now, and hooking and, catching fish, knowing the flies and what have you. I says, I'm going to put in for my guide's license, and then when our relatives come, I says, I'll be able to be the guide, and we'll be legal, right? Because you should be legal. So that's where it all started in 1977. I got my guide's license because of these relatives who didn't understand that you had to be out there at 6:30, 7 o'clock to see what was happening in the pool. And I've never regretted it. I've never regretted it because down the road it turned into a job for me, whereby I was working for the outfitter Vince Swayze from Tuckaway Lodge. He had asked if he could possibly lease our water, which was 3/4 of a mile. We had 3 good pools, and he had cabins, but he didn't have the water to go with it. He had 1 pool. So naturally, when you have 6 or 7 or 8 people coming, then you need water to fish them all. And I said, well, then I'll tell you, yeah, you can certainly lease the water with one stipulation, and that being that I be your #1 guide. And if you need extra guides, like when you have more than 3 people, of course, you need an extra guide. I says, it's your choice of who you pick, but if it's just the one guide, it's mine. So we agreed to that and made an agreement, and that's how my career really took off. And in 1984, I believe it was, we had a group here from New Jersey. They were great guys who tied their own flies, all their own flies. They didn't go, to a fly shop or anything. They tied their own, and they were some patterns which were, some were the common patterns that we have, and then others would be their own imagination of what a fish would take. I can remember the black butterfly was one of them, and it was the ugliest, ugliest looking thing you'd ever seen. But it was amazing how in the fall, because they always came in the fall, how the fish would go for that black butterfly, a black one. And later on, when I was working with Vince, and he had people coming that we could fish down at Mountain Channel, which was Camp Thomas back then, I used to sit on the bank and tie flies and come up with patterns that I thought might work. And there was one that it was called a shady man, because you know the shady lady, how well that works. Well, I decided, I had read down at Dokes, I believe, at the museum, I had read where the fish, the color that they can see best is red on low light conditions. So, what did I come up with? But an orange colored butterfly. Well, did that take off? Down there. But it had to be low light. The last fly of the night was the orange butterfly.
Wow.
My favorite pools. I've got 3 of them. But I can remember the elbow pool in the morning was my ultimate favorite. And the home pool, well, you have to love it, because, I mean, you see a fair number of fish in it. You have to love it. And schoolhouse pool, I like that because it's shaded in the mornings. It's shaded, and you've got the cool water. And it was also a very productive pool, so I enjoyed it as well. It is a beautiful, beautiful river, and to see, you know, the wildlife alongside of it, and I've taken those guides courses way back in the early 90s. I actually finished 4 of them, and we learned about flora and fauna, about the other types of fish that are in this river, because those are questions that you get from your guests that come from away. And I naturally took an interest in it, and I just felt that to know that other than sitting on the shore and falling asleep, you know, when you had your coffee break and they'd ask a question, you could come up with a plausible, good question. That was important. And the funny thing is, when they first talked about, oh, they're going to do a flight, like a guiding course. Guiding course? What? Who's going to be doing that? Well, what's that going to be all about? And I know that people up at Rocky Brook, you know, those guides have been there for years and so on.
Decades.
Yeah, what are you going to teach them fellas? Well, they had to take the course if they wanted to keep their jobs. So they came down, and they had a fabulous time. They really enjoyed it. You know, it was a course that included knowing about people's likes and dislikes on the river, and what their gear should be consisting of. And I remember down at Ponds, we did a ladies' fly fishing school there 2 or 3 times, and they asked me if I would come. And you would have your vest, and you'd explain what all you have in the pockets of your vest, which was interesting. And I used to have a little set of binoculars. They're still around, kicking around somewheres here. And I said, girls, do you know what these are? They're binoculars. Yeah, I says, they're also warden watchers. Well, they thought that was a necessary part of their take, you know, when the time came. So I've got lots of wonderful memories.